Let's go live to Melbourne now. Joining me is Labor MP Peter Khalil. Thank you for your time. The Prime Minister will meet with the mothers of veterans who've lost their lives to suicide today. There have been calls recently for a royal commission into veteran suicide. Is that something Labor would agree with?
Good morning, Laura. Look, I think it's something we need to consider. I mean, this is a very, very serious issue with a lot of the vets who are coming back from some pretty intensive theatres of operation. I mean, Australia's been involved, or the ADF has been involved in some pretty intensive conflict zones over the last several decades. I mean, we're talking about Afghanistan and Iraq before that, even going back earlier than that to East Timor. And there have been several, obviously a lot of these guys have done, and men and women have done, the ADF, several tours to some of these zones. So it is a big issue, and a lot of the vets coming back are experiencing huge problems. And of course, sadly and tragically, there have been a number of suicides, and this is something that I know that the Prime Minister's meeting with some of the parents or the mums of some of these vets who've committed suicide. If a royal commission is needed, I think that's something we would certainly consider.
Are you doubtful whether it's the right vehicle or not?
Yeah, I mean, the Royal Commission's there to look at big structural issues, the need for structural reform. If the law itself is not quite coping or breaking down, and the Royal Commission itself has certain powers to try and investigate the situation. I mean, there could be good policies put in place to address some of these issues in a bipartisan fashion without the need for a Royal Commission. I mean, we need to have the conversation. I don't think it's acceptable that this is happening. You know, war is difficult. You come back from it and you experience, a lot of guys, people experience PTSD. They struggle to just go back into civilian life or normal life if they leave the force. So, you know, there could be better policies in place, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of bipartisan support to try and get this right. Yep,
we hope so. One drought policy, is there bipartisan support there? We finally had an explanation from Bridget McKenzie yesterday explaining the farm household assistance and the legislation that is before the Parliament. It has been extended to 4 years. There will be a one-off payment, and then she says the minister in charge, i.e. her at the moment, has the discretion to basically extend that as needed. Is that good enough?
Well, the problem that we've had with the government's drought policy is that it has been largely piecemeal and inadequate. We're talking about a government that's been in power now for, what, 7 years, almost 7 years, three different terms, and there's been an inadequate drought policy. There's been no real strategy around it. We've called for them to release the report by Stephen Day that was put out. It's not like a top secret document, like put it out. And we've called for a bipartisan cabinet that can work together on what is an issue that affects you know, Australians who are doing it really, really tough in the drought across the country. So I don't see why there's this resistance to having that kind of bipartisanship. But they have been really, really mismanaged, and this is the real fear that we have.
The mismanagement. Can we just address that more immediately?
Yeah. The question is what?
Do you support the way the government appears to have structured this, that there is an extension of 4 years, there's another one-off payment, and then the minister has the discretionary power under the legislation to extend it as she sees fit?
Well, it's just come out today, as you said. I'd have to look at the details of what they're proposing. I mean, any support for farmers who are doing it tough in the drought is welcomed. I don't think that's the problem. The detail that you're talking about, okay, great, fine. I'm talking about what is the overall strategy here to deal with what is a countrywide problem, and let's deal with that in a bipartisan fashion.
Okay, the Labor review is due out tomorrow. What are you expecting?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's going to be any great surprises. I mean, there are a lot of discussion in the media, and the narrative has been all about how Labor lost the election and why it lost the election and so on, and everyone has put their 2 cents in. And I really agree with Tanya Plibersek's earlier comments on the program, and I've been thinking this myself. It's like, you know what, people don't really care. The punters out there, you know, in our electorates really don't pay that much attention to the internal navel-gazing of any particular political party. What they want is to hear how we could actually improve their lives how we serve them as our constituents and how we put forward policies at the national level that will make a significant difference to their lives and their families' lives. That's what we should be focusing on.
Jim Chalmers talking about the loss for Labor of voters in the outer suburbs of our capital cities, and that perhaps, at least from Claire O'Neill, that maybe those voters are only hearing Labor talk about, progressive social issues, and that's the wrong direction. Do you agree with those sentiments?
Well, look, I think some of the valuable contributions made by both Jim and Claire as frontbenchers are on the money as well. I mean, I've talked about, as a backbencher, the need for us to engage with multicultural communities better, to look at their needs with respect to, first-generation needs of the older Italians and Greeks that are getting into retirement age, as well as the new and emerging migrant groups. How do we support them in business, for example, and entrepreneurship, things that actually make a difference to their lives? And so we need to be better at listening to a whole range of people across the electorate, as well as putting together and working through our policies to actually make a real substantive difference to their quality of life.
Too much political correctness, Peter Khalil?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know about that. From my perspective, Laura, it is for me about serving my community first and foremost, and then also working on policies that I think, as a party, that we can put forward as an alternative government that can actually make a difference. So whether it's for education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's on economic inequality, things that actually have a substantive impact on people's lives, reducing multinational tax avoidance, things like that can actually support the budget. These are things that people want to hear about, not about how we lost and why we lost and how we didn't, talk about it correctly or whatever else. We can have all those conversations vis-a-vis our review. That's important work that we need to do. But ultimately, it's about putting forward policies for the national interest and articulating those policies so that people understand that it will actually make their lives better.
Well, I think you'll have 28,000 words to wade through, so good luck with that.
Yeah, thanks, Laura.